Number 3. Beverly J. Potter-Mintz. In early 1987, 23-year-old Beverly J. Potter-Mintz lived in the small town of Leland, North Carolina, which had a population of around 1,800 people. Beverly was married, but she and her husband were estranged. He was in the Army, and in early 1987, he was stationed in Germany. Beverly lived in a small house in Leland with the couple's 2 sons. BJ was 4 years old, and Andrew was turning 2 on February 23, 1987. On the morning of February 22, 1987, the day before Andrew's birthday, the boy's paternal grandmother picked up BJ around 10 a.m. and took him out to run some errands. That left Beverly home alone with Andrew. At about 12:30 that afternoon, Beverly's mother, Lorene, stopped by her daughter's home. She had a birthday cake for Andrew's birthday. When Lorene got to her daughter's front door, she found it unlocked, and she thought that this was odd. As she opened the door, she knocked on it. She did not get a response, but she did hear her grandson whimpering somewhere near the back of the house. Lorene went to the back bedroom, which was splattered in blood. She found Andrew crying, but he was unharmed. Beverly was lying on the bed with a pillowcase over her head, and her hands were tied behind her back. Lorene pulled the pillowcase off Beverly's head, and she started screaming. Beverly's throat had been slit nearly to the point of decapitation, and she had been stabbed 7 times. Her hands were tied behind her back with nylon rope. The medical examiner later determined that she had been sexually assaulted. The police talked to Andrew, who was home during the attack. Since he was just a day shy of his 2nd birthday, he couldn't really explain what he saw. What the police gathered is that there was a knock at the door sometime between 10 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. Beverly looked through the peephole, but it didn't look like anyone was there. So she opened the door. Then suddenly, a white man pushed his way in and attacked Beverly. After he sexually assaulted and killed Beverly, he walked out of the house, leaving Andrew physically unharmed. The police quickly eliminated all the usual suspects. At the time of the murder, Beverly's estranged husband was in Germany. Beverly had been dating a man who owned a restaurant in town, but he had an airtight alibi. Some investigators believe that the killer found Beverly through a classified ad that she had placed in the town's weekly newspaper. Beverly was trying to sell a waterbed. The weekly newspaper had a promotion where someone could place 1 free ad for a week. She did not sell the bed in the week after the ad was placed, so Beverly placed the ad again. But to take advantage of the promotion, Beverly used her mother's phone number instead of her own phone number. Not long after the 2nd classified ad was published, Beverly sold the waterbed to a friend. However, Beverly's mother, Lorene, didn't know that. On the morning of the murder, a man called Lorene and said he would be stopping by to look at the waterbed. Lorene called Beverly to tell her that the man would be coming by to inspect the waterbed, and that's when Beverly told her she had already sold it. The man did not give Lorene his name or a callback number, and Lorene didn't have call display, so they couldn't call him back. Beverly just planned to tell the man it was sold when he came by. Some investigators think that the man looking for the waterbed is the killer because at the crime scene, the police found a newspaper and Beverly's classified ad was circled in red. However, not everyone is convinced that the killer found Beverly through the ad. Some people believe that she was stalked before she was killed, and the classified ad was just a way to mislead or taunt the police. They think she was stalked because the killer seemed to know that Beverly was alone when he forced his way into her home. Also, he brought the nylon rope with him, so it's believed that the murder, or at least the sexual assault, was premeditated. Another clue that Beverly might have been stalked is that in the weeks before she was killed, she received several strange phone calls. Someone would call her, and when she picked up, they would breathe heavy and then hang up. The calls usually came minutes after she arrived home. Some investigators think that this suggests that the caller was watching her and knew her routine and her habits. If the police are flummoxed about how the killer found Beverly, they are at even more of a loss as to who killed her. About 6 years after Beverly was killed, her estranged husband and the father of her 2 sons, William Mintz, died from carbon monoxide asphyxiation. He was 29 years old. Beverly's family says that one day they hope they'll get justice, but they know it'll never heal them or make up for the pain they've had to endure. Number 2. Scott Fosnaught and Shawn Bauer. Ford is a small town in Butler County, Pennsylvania. It has a population of around 2,000 people. 2 of the town's residents were Scott Fosnaught and Shawn Bauer. The boys were neighbors for most of their lives, and they attended the same schools. Both Scott and Shawn liked dirt bikes, fishing, and hanging out with friends. Throughout their lives, they were on-again, off-again friends. On July 16, 2002, the 2 boys were just a week shy of their 16th birthdays. They spent the evening of July 16th at a local pond with several friends. They both drank a bit of alcohol, but neither young man got drunk. After the pond, they went to a friend's home, which was about 1.5 miles from their own homes. At about 1:30 a.m., Shawn and Scott started to walk home. To get home, they had to walk down a dark rural road called Cash Dollar Road. At around 1:50 a.m., a call came in to 911. Someone driving on Cash Dollar Road found 2 bodies lying in the middle of the road. The police and paramedics were there a few minutes later. They found both Scott and Shawn lying in the road a few feet from each other. Scott was already dead. Shawn was taken to the hospital, but sadly, he was pronounced dead 90 minutes after he was found. The police were instantly perplexed by the crime scene. The boys were found lying on the road, about 200 feet from a puddle of blood. Scott, who was pronounced dead at the scene, had died from blunt force trauma to the chest. His injuries included a torn aorta and a split kidney. His injuries were consistent with being hit by a large vehicle, possibly a truck. Shawn, on the other hand, died from 2 head injuries that crushed his skull. He was not injured anywhere else. A head injury without any other injury is not consistent with a pedestrian vehicle accident. In nearly all other cases, the pedestrian suffers another type of injury. Based on their injuries, there are 2 theories about what happened to Scott and Shawn as they walked down that dark road on that summer night. The first was that Scott was hit by a vehicle, like a large truck, and he was dragged about 200 feet. The driver, or someone else in the car, killed Shawn by striking him on the head with some unknown object because he didn't want there to be any witnesses to him running down Scott. Shawn's family is not convinced that is what happened because they said Shawn was a fighter and he didn't have any defensive wounds. His only wounds were the 2 head injuries that crushed his skull. The second theory is that Scott was hit by the vehicle, and Shawn was hit in the head by something that was protruding from the vehicle, like a side view mirror. However, this scenario also has a series of problems. Besides Scott's injuries to his chest, there is no evidence that the boys were hit by a vehicle. Usually when a vehicle strikes a person, the vehicle is damaged and it leaves some trace at the crash site. In the area where the bodies were found, there were no skid marks or tire tracks, and the police didn't find any broken glass or vehicle pieces. Another problem stems from the fact that the two boys were found 200 feet from a puddle of blood. It is thought that Scott was hit by a vehicle where the blood was found, and he was dragged by the vehicle to the place where his body was found. But Scott did not have any marks or injuries that indicated he had been dragged. Also, both boys were found lying close to each other. If Scott was dragged for 200 feet, how did Shawn end up lying near him? Shawn had only suffered the 2 head injuries, so he definitely wasn't dragged by the vehicle. The police have absolutely no explanation as to how the bodies ended up near each other. Unfortunately, since so little evidence was found at the crime scene, the police are not only baffled by what killed the boys, they are completely mystified about who killed them. They aren't sure if it was a hit and run or if the boys were targeted. The police think that the killer was a local person because the road that the boys were killed on is a remote road that is generally only used by people living in the area. The families of Shawn and Scott said that their biggest concern isn't finding out who killed them. They said they really just want to know what happened that night and how the boys died. Since there was not very much physical evidence found at the crime scene, the police think that the only way the case will be solved is if someone comes forward with information. If no one comes forward, the identity of the person who killed Scott Fosnaught and Shawn Bauer and how they died will remain mysteries. Number 1. The Jeff Davis 8. With a population of just over 10,000 people, Jennings is the largest town in Jefferson Davis Parish, which is in southwest Louisiana. Jennings is also home to a series of strange mysteries that started in May 2005. On May 20th, a man who was fishing in a canal on the outskirts of Jennings made a horrifying discovery. At first, he thought he saw a mannequin floating in the water, but then he saw it was attracting flies, and he knew it wasn't a mannequin. The police pulled the body from the water a short time later, and they ran the fingerprints. She was identified as Loretta Sean Lewis, a wife and mother of 2. Loretta married Murphy Lewis in 2000, and they had 2 sons together. One son was born in 1999, and the other was born in 2003. When Murphy and Loretta got married, Loretta was doing hard drugs recreationally. But after a while, she became addicted to crack cocaine. She would abandon her family for days and weeks at a time to go on drug binges. She was also known to prostitute herself to support her habit. On the last day that Loretta was seen alive, she was in the company of a pimp and a drug dealer with a reputation for violence named Frankie Richard. Later that same day, Loretta was doing drugs in a room at the Bordeaux Inn, which was a rundown motel in Jennings. She was with a man named Jermaine Washington and 2 other sex workers named Muggy Brown and Nicole Guillory. The medical examiner couldn't determine Loretta's cause of death. She did not have any cuts or bruises on her body, so the medical examiner thinks that she may have been suffocated to death. In the weeks after Loretta's murder, no arrests were made. Loretta's family thought that the police didn't do enough to investigate the murder. Loretta's husband, Murphy Lewis, was shocked that the police didn't even interview him. He pointed out that in most murder cases, the person's romantic partner, or the former romantic partner, is usually the first suspect. But the police never talked to him. Just over a month after Loretta's body was found, on June 18, 2005, 3 men found the body of a woman in the Aguilar Canal, just south of Jennings. The body was identified as 30-year-old Ernestine Patterson. She had clearly been a victim of a homicide. There were 3 cuts on her neck. Like the first victim, Ernestine was a sex worker who lived in Jennings. This time, the police had suspects. They were Byron Chad Jones and Lauren Nixon, 2 residents of Jennings. Both men were seen with Ernestine on the night that she went missing at an abandoned house in Jennings. Then later that night, Nixon's girlfriend said that both Jones and Nixon came home with something heavy in a large, blood-soaked garbage bag. Nixon told his girlfriend that Ernestine's body was in the garbage bag. He said that he held her down while Jones cut her throat. The men let the bag sit on the porch for a while, then a person driving a white car picked them up, and they took the bag with them. Nixon's girlfriend then washed the blood off the porch. The police asked Nixon's girlfriend's daughter, who lived in the house, if she saw anything unusual that night. She said that when Nixon came home, he was covered in blood. The police also interviewed Nixon's neighbor, who happened to be Ernestine's uncle. He said that on the night that Ernestine was killed, he gave Nixon a large industrial-sized garbage bag. Both Jones and Nixon were interviewed by the police. Nixon said that Jones came to his house covered in blood, but he said he had nothing to do with Ernestine's murder. Jones, on the other hand, said he had an alibi for the night of the murder. He had checked himself into the hospital for a psych evaluation because he had smoked crack and formaldehyde. But based on the time he checked himself into the hospital, the police thought he had enough time to kill Ernestine. In April 2006, nearly a year after Ernestine was killed, both Jones and Nixon were arrested for murder. But the charges against the 2 men were soon dropped because there was not enough physical evidence to go to trial. Once again, the police were accused of not properly investigating the crime. For example, they didn't test the cracks between the boards of Nixon's porch for blood until 18 months after the murder. When they did test for blood, they didn't find any. Also, the police received tips that Ernestine was killed in an abandoned house, and the police would be able to find the murder weapon, which was a serrated hunting knife, inside the house. But the police never followed up on the tips, and they didn't search the house. On March 15, 2006, Tracy Shawn, a cousin of Loretta Shawn Lewis, called the police to report her friend, 21-year-old Kristen Lopez, missing. Lopez was a 21-year-old sex worker who often worked out of the Boudreaux Inn. Her body was found 3 days later in a canal 15 miles southwest of Jennings. Like the first victim, Kristen's body had no outward signs of trauma. Her blood was tested, and like the first 2 victims, she had alcohol and cocaine in her system. One of the last people that Kristen was seen with was Frankie Richard, whom Kristen frequently partied with. The police asked Frankie if he knew what happened to Kristen, and he said he caught her and Tracy Shawn trying to steal from him, so he kicked them out of the room that he was renting at the Budget Inn, which was another rundown motel in Jennings. He said that after that, he didn't know what happened to Kristen. Tracy initially told the police that what Frankie said was true. But then Tracy changed her story and said she left the room and left Kristen behind. Nevertheless, once again, there were no arrests in the weeks after the murder. Whitney Dubois, who lived in Jennings, had a rough childhood. Her mother abandoned her when she was young, and she was raised by her brother, Mike Dubois, who was 20 years older than her. When Whitney was older, both she and her boyfriend, Alvin Lewis, developed addictions to crack cocaine. Alvin is the brother of Murphy Lewis, the husband of the first victim. In 1996, Whitney found out she was pregnant and she got clean. However, that changed after she gave birth to her daughter. She developed an infection after she had a cesarean section, and she started taking pills to deal with the pain. She eventually got back into crack cocaine, and she turned to sex work to pay for her drug habit. On May 11, 2007, Whitney got into a fight with some family members that she wanted to stay with. She had a problem with stealing, so they refused to let her stay. She left her family's house and walked to Frankie Richard's home. People saw Whitney and Frankie talking in front of his house, and then Whitney walked away. One witness said she saw Frankie go after her. The next morning, at 7:30, Whitney's body was found in the intersection of two dirt roads outside of Jennings. The person who found her was Jamie Turan, who was an associate of Frankie Richard. He said he was driving on Interstate 102 when he spotted the body. The problem with this story is that Interstate 102 is half a mile from where the body was found. So it probably wasn't possible that Turan saw the body from Interstate 102. This has led to suspicions that Turan knew the body was there, and he lied about seeing the body from the interstate. After Turan called the police, he and Frankie drove over to Whitney's brother's home. Frankie had grown up with Whitney's brother and guardian, Mike Dubois. Turan told Mike and Whitney's family they had found her body, and then he shocked them by offering them $2,500 to pay for her funeral. Whitney's family thought that he offered the money because he was feeling guilty about something regarding her death. The medical examiner was not able to determine how Whitney died. In May 2007, not long after Whitney was killed, Frankie Richard was charged with the March 2006 murder of Kristen Lopez. Tracy says Shawn told the police a third story about what happened on the night that Kristen was killed. Tracy claimed that Frankie beat up Kristen and then dragged her into the canal and held her head underwater until she stopped moving. But there was no physical evidence to back up her claims, so the charges against Frankie were dropped weeks later. Nearly 2 years before Kristen Lopez was killed, she was a witness to a controversial police raid on a house in Jennings. The house was rented by a man named Harvey Lee Beverly. Beverly and his partner, Mike Dubois, Whitney's brother who raised her, sold pain pills out of the house. During the police raid, which happened on April 20th, 2005, 43-year-old Leonard Crochet was shot and killed. The officer who shot him claimed that Crochet was reaching for something in his pants, so he shot him. But it turned out that Crochet was unarmed. Crochet's friends and family alleged that the police wanted Crochet to sell drugs for them, and he refused. On July 25, 2007, 4 months after Kristen was killed, and about 2 months after Whitney was killed, Beverly was found stabbed to death in his house. Shortly before he died, Beverly told Whitney's brother, Mike Dubois, that he had information about who killed Whitney and the other sex workers. But whatever Beverly knew, he took it to the grave with him. 10 months after Beverly's murder, on May 28, 2008, 23-year-old Laconia Chantel Brown, who went by the name Muggy, walked out of her grandmother's home in Jennings with a bag full of clothes. Muggy said she was going out to do some laundry. Muggy's grandmother thought that this was odd because she had a washer and dryer in her home. But she didn't say anything to Muggy or try to stop her from leaving. Hours later, at 2 a.m., a police officer was driving down a dirt road, and on a dirt track that only led to a police shooting range, he found Muggy's body. Her throat had been cut, and her body was drenched in bleach. The bleach destroyed a lot of potential evidence, like fingerprints and DNA. Muggy was a well-known sex worker in Jennings. She was also connected to 2 of the other murders. She was in the room at the Bordeaux Inn with Jermaine Washington, who was her boyfriend, another sex worker named Nicole Guillory, and the first victim, Loretta Shawn Lewis, on the day that Loretta went missing. According to the book Murder in the Bayou by Ethan Brown, it is suspected that Jermaine Washington was the person who killed Loretta. Supposedly, he suffocated Loretta with a pillow while Muggy and Nicole watched on. Muggy was also questioned during the investigation into the murder of Ernestine Patterson. Muggy was cousins with one of the suspects, Lawrence Nixon. According to the book Murder in the Bayou, Muggy actually saw Nixon and Byron Chad Jones kill Ernestine. Muggy never told the police that she witnessed the murder. Instead, she told them that she thought that Ernestine was killed by some migrant workers. Besides witnessing 2 murders, Muggy may have also been involved in another very serious crime that happened in Jennings. In November 2005, a few months after the first 2 murders, Muggy had lured a young woman named Rosalind Rowe into Nixon's house, where she was sexually assaulted by Nixon's friend, Jarrell Parfrey. Rosalind's father was a private investigator named Kirk Menard. Her mother was Kalani Borg, a former Jennings police officer. Borg was one of 7 female officers who was suing the former chief of police in Jennings, Lucky DeLuche. Before DeLuche joined the Jennings Police Department, he was the head of the Violent Crimes Task Force in Calcasieu Parish, which is the parish west of Jefferson Davis Parish. In 1997, DeLuche had been accused of trying to pin a triple homicide at a convenience store in Calcasieu Parish on an innocent man. It's believed he tried to pin the murder on an innocent man because there was a lot of evidence that indicated that the son of the sheriff of Calcasieu Parish was the real killer. DeLuche was also accused of sexually abusing a 4-year-old girl. However, the allegations of sexual abuse were never pursued by the Sheriff's Department or the District Attorney's Office. In the autumn of 2000, DeLuche was made the police chief of Jennings, and controversy followed him. As the chief of police, he was accused of sexually harassing and sexually assaulting the female officers. He threatened violence if they didn't comply with his demands, and then humiliated them when they did comply. This led to 7 female officers, including Kalani Borg, to file a lawsuit against DeLuche and several other male officers on the Jennings police force. The lawsuit was pending when Borg's daughter was sexually assaulted. Supposedly, Jarrell Parfrey, who was accused of sexually assaulting Borg's daughter, Rosalind Rowe, gave Muggy some drugs to lure Rosalind to Nixon's house, and then he gave Nixon some drugs as payment for using his house. Parfrey was arrested for the sexual assault, but the charges against him were dropped when the witnesses refused to testify. Rosalind's father, Kirk Menard, said that all the witnesses had been intimidated into not testifying. After the attack on his daughter, Menard, who was a private investigator, started to investigate the murders of the women in Jennings. On June 9, 2007, there was another controversial shooting in Jefferson Davis County. Stephen Gunter was killed by a sheriff's deputy named Terry Guillory after the police were called to Gunter's home in Lake Arthur, Louisiana. Terry Guillory was an odd choice to be called to the scene because he was the warden of the parish's jail. Gunter and his girlfriend were having an argument, and one of their neighbors called the police. When the police arrived, Gunter and his girlfriend both told them that they didn't need their help. Yet, the situation somehow escalated. Terry Guillory was called to the scene, and he went into the couple's home. Terry said that Gunter fired several rounds at him with a handgun, and he returned fire. However, the medical examiner thought that there was a cover-up because Gunter didn't have any gunshot residue on him. Had Gunter really fired at Terry, there would have been gunshot residue on his hands or his clothes, but there was none. Before Gunter moved to Lake Arthur, he lived in a trailer park in Jennings, near the Boudreaux Inn. He was an alcoholic and a crack addict, and he knew the murdered women from drinking and doing drugs at a dive bar in Jennings. Gunter also knew the police because he drank at the bar where the police in Jennings drank. In the book, Murder in the Bayou, author Ethan Brown claims that Gunter had information about the murdered sex workers. The officer who shot Gunter, Terry Guillory, was the warden of the jail in Jefferson Davis Parish. Terry was accused of sexually assaulting female prisoners, and he allowed the other officers to sexually assault the women as well. Supposedly, Terry ran the prison like a brothel. High-ranking members of the police force and the sheriff's department, along with other Johns, would visit the jail to have sex with the sex workers who were in jail. One witness, who was a cellmate of Loretta Station Lewis, said that Terry came into their cell and had sex with Loretta. Then in December 2007, two women sat down for an interview with Jesse Ewing, a sergeant with the Jennings Police Department. Ewing was a good cop, and he was suspicious of other officers on the force. He often noticed that drugs and money went missing from the evidence room. Ewing recorded his interview with the two women. The two women said that they were talking to Frankie Richard's niece, Hannah Connor, and Connor told them she was there when Frankie killed Kristen Lopez. After killing Kristen, Frankie put her body in a barrel and he loaded it into a pickup truck. After dumping the body, he sold the truck to an officer that the women called Mr. Warren. Mr. Warren was the Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Department Chief Criminal Investigation Officer, Warren Gary. The women also told Ewing that Hannah Connor told them that she helped Frankie drown Whitney Dubois. After he dumped the body, he once again sold the vehicle to Officer Warren. Ewing was able to validate some of the things that the women said. It turned out that Warren did buy a pickup truck from a woman named Connie Seiler on March 29, 2007, about 12 days after Lopez was killed. Seiler was also a sex worker, and she dropped off Kristen at Frankie's motel room on the day that she went missing. Warren Gary kept the truck for less than 3 weeks. He had purchased the truck for $8,748.90, but he managed to sell it for $15,500. Both purchase prices were well above the Blue Book value. But who Warren Gary sold the truck to, and how he made nearly 100% return on his investment, is a mystery. After interviewing the two women, Sergeant Ewing gave the recording to Kirk Menard, the private investigator who was looking into the murders. Menard took the tapes to the FBI. After the FBI got the tapes, Ewing, who has a spotless record, was fired for sexual misconduct. One of the women he interviewed said that he sexually touched her during the interview. Although there was no evidence of this on the recording, Ewing was fired after 20 years on the force. Meanwhile, Warren Gary was promoted, and he was put in charge of the evidence room. But if any of this is connected to Muggy Brown's murder is unclear. According to the book Murder in the Bayou, just before Muggy was killed, a criminal in Jennings named Irvin Edwards was looking for her because he believes she stole $3,000 from him. On the day that Muggy was killed, she had purchased a bus ticket for Washington, D.C., and she was being driven to the bus station by Ricardo Williams, who was an associate of Frankie Richard. Supposedly, Tracy Chasson was also in the vehicle. At some point, Ricardo Williams and Muggy got into an argument, and Williams slashed her throat. Williams then called Irvin Edwards, and he dumped the body. On September 11, 2008, about 5 months after Muggy was killed, hunters found the badly decomposed body of a woman in a wooded area about a mile south of where Muggy's body was found. The remains were near skeletal, so the body couldn't be identified right away. The cause of death also couldn't be determined. A few days after the body was found, a man named Russell Carrier called the district attorney's office and told them that he saw 3 men walk out of the forest where the body was found. One of them was Ricardo Williams, who was an associate of Frankie Richard and the man who supposedly killed Muggy Brown. In a side note, in 2010, Russell Carrier was killed when he was run over by a train in an apparent suicide. However, his family said he wasn't depressed and he wasn't suicidal. But in October 2010, he apparently just laid down on a set of tracks and let the train run over him. Not long after the woman's body was found in the woods, the parents of Crystal Zeno, who lived in Lake Arthur, Louisiana, had a strange encounter with the warden of the Jefferson Davis County Prison, Terry Guillory. Crystal Zeno was 24 years old, and she was the mother of 1. Like the other 5 dead women, Crystal was a sex worker who was addicted to crack. Her family had reported her missing less than 2 weeks before the body was found, after they couldn't get a hold of her for a few days. Crystal had lived in Lake Arthur, but she moved to Jennings a few months before she went missing. In Jennings, she spent her time living between 2 different homes. Sometimes she stayed with 17-year-old Brittany Gary and Brittany's mother, Teresa. Other times she lived with Frankie Richard. After the body was found, but before it was positively identified, Terry Guillory drove to Crystal's parents' house and told them that a body had been found and it was Crystal's body. While talking to her parents, unprompted, Terry said, "I didn't kill her." Her parents asked Terry how he knew it was Crystal's body. They had heard a body was found, but they thought it was too decomposed to be identified. Terry told them that he knew it was Crystal because he recognized a tattoo on an intimate area of her body. This shocked Crystal's parents because they thought that the only way that Terry could have known that is if he had sex with her. So they accused him of having sex with her. Terry didn't confirm or deny it, and then he made an excuse to leave. 2 months after the body was found, testing verified that the body was Crystal Zeno. On November 2, 2008, Crystal's former roommate, 17-year-old Brittany Gary, went to a dollar store to buy some minutes for her phone. Recently, Brittany had developed an addiction to crack, and she started selling her body. Brittany didn't return from the store, and her mother, Teresa, reported her missing the next evening. The police said that they thought that Brittany had just run away, and they didn't investigate her disappearance. They said this even though 6 other sex workers had been killed in the last 3.5 years, and Brittany was connected to 3 of the victims. Brittany was good friends with the fourth victim, Muggy Brown. She lived with Crystal Zeno, the fifth victim, and her mother was cousins of the third victim, Kristen Lopez. Also, Teresa, Brittany's mother, knew all 6 women. After a few days, Brittany had not been found, so her family formed their own search party, and every day they looked for her. They had absolutely no support from the Jennings Police Department or the Jefferson Davis Sheriff's Office. 13 days after Brittany went missing, her body was found lying on a dirt track in a rice field. The Jennings police were alerted, and for the first time since the murder started, the FBI was called in. Then a month after Brittany's body was found, a task force was formed to look into the 7 murders that happened between May 2005 and November 2008. The police said that they didn't have any suspects in Brittany's murder. But just like most of the other victims, Brittany did have some connections to Frankie Richard. When Brittany went missing, her mother, Teresa, made and posted missing persons flyers, which asked people to call if they had any information on Brittany's whereabouts. The phone number she listed on the flyers was the phone number of Hannah Connor, Frankie's niece. Connor told the police that she and Teresa were close friends. Teresa also took care of Frankie's brother while he was recovering from colon cancer. One person who was accused of being involved in Brittany's murder was Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff Deputy Danny Barry. Barry supposedly had a secret mobile home, and the inside of it was covered in plastic wrap. There were also chains that hung from the ceiling. Supposedly, every day Barry would bring a sex worker to the trailer. One of his favorite sex workers was Brittany. Frankie Richard also knew Danny Barry. According to one witness who talked to the task force, Barry and Frankie smoked crack together. Another witness said that Barry thought that Brittany knew too much about what was happening around Jennings. Barry told Frankie that he needed to cover it up if Frankie said he would take care of it. Frankie was questioned about Brittany's murder, and he said he wasn't involved. Instead, Frankie accused Danny Barry of killing Brittany. Danny Barry was never charged or named as a suspect in connection with Brittany's murder. When Barry was questioned by the task force, he wasn't even asked about the accusations against him. In November 2008, the task force got a tip that another woman may be killed. Her name was Nicole Guillory. Nicole did seem like a potential target. She was a Jennings sex worker who was involved in the town's drug scene. She was supposedly in the room when the first victim, Lorette Shawn Lewis, was killed by Jermaine Washington. Her cousin was Terry Guillory, the sheriff's deputy who ran the parish's jail. Nicole had a boyfriend who also had a criminal history. Her boyfriend said that one time Terry offered to let him out of jail if he allowed Terry to have sex with Nicole. Despite the fact that they received a tip that she might be killed and she seemed like a potential victim, the task force did nothing to help or protect Nicole. Nicole, who was 26, apparently knew her life was in danger. Nicole told her mother that she thought she would be dead before she was 27. On August 19, 2009, 2 weeks shy of her 27th birthday, Nicole's mother reported her missing. Her family hadn't seen or heard from her in 4 days. Just hours after she was reported missing, maintenance workers found her body on a slope of an overpass near Egan, Louisiana, which is about 10 miles west of Jennings. Just like all the other victims, Nicole had alcohol and drugs in her system when she died. Also, like 5 of the other victims, there was no official cause of death. It is thought that she asphyxiated to death. After Nicole Guillory was killed, the murders of sex workers in Jennings came to an end. On paper, the case of the Jeff Davis 8 looks like it could be the work of a serial killer. All the victims were sex workers, and they were all similar in age. 6 of the women were probably asphyxiated to death, and the other 2 had their throats cut. Also, all their bodies were dumped in a different place than they were killed. But of course, the string of murders is much more complicated than that. So what exactly happened in Jennings, Louisiana? To try and get a clearer picture of what happened, we'll break it down victim by victim. The first victim was Loretta Shawn Lewis, who died on May 17, 2005. Earlier on the day that she died, she met with Frankie Richard. Author of Murder in the Bayou, Ethan Brown, says that Loretta was suffocated to death by Jermaine Washington in the presence of his girlfriend, who was also the 4th victim, Muggy Brown, and the 8th victim, Nicole Guillory. There is also some speculation that Loretta had a seizure, and this led to her death. Instead of calling for help, Jermaine Washington, Muggy Brown, and Nicole Guillory just dumped the body. The second victim was Ernestine Patterson, who was killed about a month after Loretta was killed. It is suspected that she was killed by Lawrence Nixon and Byron Chad Jones. Muggy Brown supposedly witnessed the murder. The third victim was Kristen Lopez, who was killed in March 2007. Kristen was a witness to the April 2005 police raid where Leonard Crochet was killed. She was the first witness to the raid to be killed, and then months later, a second witness to the raid, Harvey Lee Burley, was stabbed to death. The last time anyone saw Kristen alive, she was in Frankie Richard's motel room. A witness told the task force that Frankie got mad at Kristen because he wanted her to perform oral sex on him, and she refused. So Frankie beat her up, and then forced Tracy Chasson, Loretta's cousin, to drown her in a bucket. After she was dead, they dumped her body, and then sold the truck that was used to transport the body to Warren Gary, who was a deputy with the sheriff's department. Frankie was even charged with Kristen's murder, but the charges were dropped a few weeks later. The next to die was Whitney Dubois, who was killed in May 2007. A person who was in a drug rehabilitation program with Frankie Richard said that Frankie talked openly about Whitney's murder in the drug rehabilitation. Supposedly, Frankie said that he and Whitney were doing drugs, and then he became angry. He said he strangled Whitney to death, and then he got Jamie Turan to help him dump the body. Turan then reported finding the body hours later. The fourth victim, who was killed in May 2007, was Muggy Brown. Muggy supposedly witnessed the murders of the first 2 victims, Loretta Chasson Lewis and Ernestine Patterson. Muggy was the boyfriend of Jermaine Washington, who supposedly killed Loretta. A few days before Muggy was killed, a local criminal named Irvin Edwards went looking for Muggy in Washington because he thought that they stole $3,000 from him. Edwards found Washington and confronted him, and Washington told him that Muggy had stolen the money. Muggy found out that Edwards was looking for her, and she decided to get out of town. Ethan Brown said he believes that an associate of Frankie Richard, named Ricardo Williams, drove Muggy to the bus station. Tracy Chasson was also in the vehicle. In the vehicle, Ricardo Williams got into an argument with Muggy, and he ended up slashing her throat. Williams then called Irvin Edwards, who was looking for Muggy, and he was the one who dumped the body. Muggy also told several family members that if something happened to her boyfriend, Jermaine Washington, was probably involved. Then 5 months later, Crystal Zeno was killed. Around the time that she was killed, Crystal was crashing at Frankie Richard's home. Ethan Brown said that on the night that she went missing, associates of Frankie Richard picked her up. The men were Eugene Ivory, Tyson Mouton, and Ricardo Williams. Supposedly, they took her out to the woods, where they strangled her. Crystal's murder was followed by the killing of Brittany Gary less than 3 weeks later. It is suspected that Sheriff's Deputy Danny Barry was involved in her murder. A witness told the task force that Barry and Frankie Richard worked together on the murder. Barry told Frankie that he needed something covered up if Frankie was the one who physically killed Crystal. Then finally, there's the murder of Nicole Guillory, which happened in November 2009. Her murder is the most mysterious. Her family is convinced that the police in Jennings had something to do with her murder. No suspects have ever been named in her case. One name that you probably noticed was mentioned throughout the video was Frankie Richard. It turned out that 7 of the 8 victims knew Frankie, and some even lived with him. The only victim who didn't know him was Ernestine Patterson. Also, in several cases, Frankie was the last person seen with the victim. Frankie was charged in connection with one of the murders, the murder of Kristen Lopez, but those charges were eventually dropped. Frankie has denied being involved in any of the murders. Instead, he said the murders were committed by Danny Barry, the sheriff's deputy who was accused of being involved in the murder of Brittany Gary. Frankie pointed out that Barry died from cancer in August 2010, and after he was dead, the murder stopped. But not everyone believes Frankie. He was friends with 7 of the victims, and in several cases, he was the last person to see them alive. Also, several witnesses told the task force that Frankie was involved in at least a few of the murders. The question is then, why wasn't Frankie ever prosecuted for any of the murders? Well, Frankie had an unusual relationship with the Jennings Police Department and the Jefferson Davis Sheriff's Office. Even before the women started being killed, Frankie's relationship with the law enforcement in Jennings was odd. It's believed that in 1990, Frankie and a sheriff's deputy stole 300 pounds of marijuana from the evidence room in the sheriff's department. Between May 2005 and August 2009, when the women were being killed, Frankie had been arrested 3 times, and each time he was facing serious jail time. This included being charged with Kristen Lopez's murder. But each time the charges were dropped because there was a problem with the evidence or the evidence went missing. Even after the task force was formed, Frankie seemed to maintain his questionable relationship with law enforcement. For example, Frankie was given keys to the office of the task force. Some people believe that law enforcement turned a blind eye to Frankie's actions because he had dirt on members of the police and the sheriff's office. For example, witnesses said that several officers with both the police department and the sheriff's office had sex with the murdered sex workers. In some cases, they had sex with the women inside the Jefferson Davis Parish Jail, which is located in Jennings. Also, all 8 of the murdered women were police informants. The police in Jennings were notorious for letting their informants commit crimes in exchange for information on other criminals. So it's even possible that Frankie was a police informant, and the police turned a blind eye to his criminal activities, and it got out of hand when he started killing women. Once he started killing women, they couldn't stop him because he would tell investigators what he knew about the police department and the sheriff's department. Basically, Frankie got away with murder because he had the insurance of mutual destruction. Members of the police force and the sheriff's office couldn't arrest him because they would be in serious trouble themselves. but it could be much more sinister than that. Several witnesses told the task force that members of the Jennings Police Department and the Jefferson Davis Sheriff's Department asked Frankie to kill some of the women. Regardless, many people think that if Frankie was ever sentenced to serious jail time, it could have been very bad news for some of the officers in both the police department and the sheriff's department. As evidence of this, people point out that anytime he was charged, there just happened to be a problem with the evidence, which was being stored at the Jefferson Davis Sheriff's Office. But if any of this was remotely true, then wouldn't the task force have discovered these oddities and made them public? Well, according to the FBI, the Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Department ran the task force. The Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office is located in Jennings, and many of the sheriff's deputies were accused of wrongdoings. Sheriff's Deputy Warren Gary was accused of being an accessory after the fact in the murder of Kristen Lopez because he purchased the truck that was supposedly used to transport her body. Sheriff's Deputy Terry Guillory was the warden of the jail, and he was accused of sleeping with women prisoners and treating the jail like a brothel. And finally, Sheriff's Deputy Danny Barry was accused of being involved in the murder of Brittany Gary. Clearly, there were conflicts of interest, but the Sheriff's Department was still allowed to lead the task force. Perhaps to the surprise of no one, the task force investigation did not lead to any arrests, and the murders of the Jeff Davis 8 remain unsolved. The families of the victims are hoping that one day they'll get justice, but since it's been nearly 10 years since the last murder and no arrests have been made, they doubt anyone will ever be arrested for the murders. Thanks a lot for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please go to criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. Well, that is all for today. Thank you again for watching.